and I would like to introduce you Kelly. Kelly's favorite series are actually the How to Train Your Dragon stories. Who has read those? I've read them. They're fun. Unfortunately, she won't be talking about the best practices for training your dragons here. But she will help you give your users the perfect start. So please join me in welcoming Kelly to the stage.
Thanks, Peter. Welcome back from lunch. If you get a little bit sleepy, just try and stay awake, and I will promise that having this on my cheek is the most natural thing in the world. That is the deal we're going to strike here. I have been an ecosystem designer for the past few years, and along the way, I have observed and seen a lot of apps out there and some challenges with onboarding, and some ways that I think we can improve that experience for our customers. Show of hands of how many people have apps on the marketplace today. A lot of people. How many? Keep your hands up. Does anyone have an onboarding strategy? Is anyone onboarding their? Okay. Cool. I think there's something for everyone, by the way. If you have one, great, and if you don't, you will after today. So, what is onboarding, and why is onboarding important? Well, onboarding is a bit like your first date with the user. You've invested some time and effort into your dating profile, and you wooed someone onto a first date. So now it's crucial to make a good first impression. Similar to how your marketplace listing wooed someone into a trial, you don't want to blow this. Show of hands of how many people have uninstalled an app on your phone because it was just too hard to figure out and you just decided too hard. Yep. Let's not do that. A great onboarding experience helps the user accomplish their tasks quickly, and the main goal here is to provide that first great experience so you get that second date. What's wrong with how we do it today? There are two key problems that I would say obstacles that we need to overcome when we think about helping our users to onboard. The first challenge here is that apps are installed by admins and not end users. If end users aren't even notified of a change in the product by their admins, then it's really difficult to expect them to know that a new app has been installed, what to do with it, or how to use it. How many people noticed the new navigation item appear in this UI? It's quite subtle, and I'm going to show you again, because that is the signal that your end users have to understand that your app has been installed. Really hard to detect. The second issue that we have is the admin experience tends to be missing or not supported. Admins need to be able to correctly install and configure your app if end users are going to have a chance of actually using the app at all. The average app loses 77% of its daily active users within the first 3 days of post-install. This statistic actually applies to mobile apps, but there is a lesson here. If admin and end users can't figure out how to evaluate that app soon after it gets installed, your chance of adoption really decreases. And of course, we have the added problem of getting admins right now to communicate out to end users that there is something new in their environment. So I'm going to turn towards some design principles that you can use on any of our products. They're not even necessarily Atlassian specific, but they are a way to guide your thinking when you think about your own onboarding experience. Assume that your end users and your admins don't know anything. Sometimes we have an end user that goes and researches an app because they have something in their environment that they need. They do all that research, they decide that they want to try the app, and they have to go find their admin and ask that person to install it. The admin can install that app, which is great, but they lack any context about what that app does. They're going to want to troubleshoot that, they're going to want to do the setup, and if they have no context, that job gets a lot harder. Or we have a case where an admin may install the app, but then they're not communicating. As I showed you a second ago, that new feature can be very subtle in appearance, and most users won't notice it by themselves. So it's our job as vendors and designers to recognize these challenges that our users face and coach them through that onboarding process. Reducing friction and increasing flow. We want all of our users to flow seamlessly from one step to the next. And as you think about onboarding, look and evaluate at what reduces friction and increases flow. Sometimes it might mean adding a step or a bit of information, and at other times it might mean removing distractions. Showing versus telling. And what I mean here is if anyone is into digital photography, if you get your new DSLR, you get a manual that's about this thick. It's really not something you want to sit down and read. Instead, you might just turn it on and start playing with it, or have someone show you a couple of features. What I'm saying here is that people like to learn by experience. So when we're coaching our users through a setup process, showing them how to do something with visuals as opposed to describing it with text is going to be the better bet. Keeping your users in context. And in the world of Atlassian products, specifically what I mean about that is we want to keep our user focused on the task. And if there's something they don't understand or they hit a snag and they have to go out of the product to look up documentation, that's friction, that's a problem. We want to keep them inside the product and keep them focused on their task. So that means maybe bringing help inside the product. So let's take a look at our admin users specifically and how we can help them install and onboard your app. The admin user is focused on their own goal, aren't we all at work? They may or may not be aware of an app's value proposition. They might not be the person who needs the app for their own task. Don't rely on admins to communicate directly with end users without some kind of prompt. Especially in large organizations, it's very difficult for communication to be flowing. And with that in mind, I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the UI locations in our products to help orient with a flow that I'm about to show you. So as I talk about this, I'm talking about both cloud and server, Jira, Confluence, and Bitbucket primarily, and those are the examples you're going to see. But this really could apply in a number of situations, and I'll try and clarify cloud and server, by the way. A few key terms here. The admin UI has the dark, in our cloud UI, has the dark vertical band here. I'm showing you specifically UPM, which is our Universal Plugin Manager. And this is where our admins are browsing apps as well as installing them. And if any are already installed, this is where they go to manage it. And we have our product UI. I just want to point out that these are the locations in which we can work and try and improve that onboarding experience. And also that the color difference here in the navigation is intentional, and that I'm going to be reusing this for our journey. So the dark steps reinforce that the admin, these are some steps that the admin needs to go through, and the lighter blue is for the end users. This is a high-level journey. This is actually starting with your user clicking a try button. This may be in a couple of locations in our environment, either within UPM, or they could have done this on Marketplace, but all roads lead into UPM. An installation dialog shows up, and we throw a confirmation modal. It's really at that point, this confirmation modal, that you can start to control the experience. Once you confirm the installation has gone well, we want to actually help them get started with the next steps. If you have configuration, we want them to be able to do that properly. And we want them to announce this new feature to our end users. Our end users, meanwhile, need to first become aware of that new feature. We want them to start to use it. It needs to be easy for them to start that first time. And if they're successful, they'll continue to use it. And you have a new customer. So again, starting with this confirm step, let me show you how you can control this experience. Typically, this is our modal dialog, and what we're seeing here is some information or a template, and I think you control the logo and the name, and very little else on here. This user is left with simply closing this modal. And if they read the instructions, now they have to remember what that said. It actually told them to go to a Manage UI for next steps. With this particular app, which is ours, there's nothing in the Manage UI to help them out. They just continue to fumble and stumble around. We've basically dropped them off a cliff here. If an admin doesn't know what the next steps are, they may not be motivated to figure it out. But this is what you can do. There is now a Get Started button on this modal, and this is the single most important thing, actually, that I think I will say throughout this entire talk. This is simple to implement. You can add the URL within your descriptor, and a button appears. You control the destination on that button. But this is the first clue that your user has about what they should do next after installation. For more information on how to implement that button, go.atlassian.com/post-install. There's actually a great blog post by Ralph and some of the code to get you going on this. There are a couple of options, by the way, not just Get Started, but I actually recommend Get Started, even if you have configuration. It's a very clear queue. Okay, so as part of confirmation, we're giving our users that Get Started button, but also provide a welcome email. I know a lot of vendors are doing this, and it's really great. If you're not doing it, definitely consider it. And what's happening here is this is a trigger that something ended up on the system. This is another way if your admin didn't catch the modal or well, actually, this is probably your technical contact who may not have installed it, but it is a signal to them that something new is on the system and provides resources as well as introduces you as the vendor. These emails are, by the way, not from Atlassian. Vendors are triggering this, but our marketplace APIs allow you to detect a new trial, and then from there you can trigger email. I think I know your question, but we will get to it. Okay, so that Get Started button I mentioned. The destination is what I want to talk about now. A Get Started page. This is something you entirely would control this content. And when you create a Get Started page, you can iframe that into the admin UI. Here's a great example of a Get Started page. They don't have to be overly complicated, but there's some great information from Jira Miscellaneous workflow extensions here. The content on this page is giving next steps with instruction for configuration if that's actually what you need to be doing, where to find the feature, some support documentation or other educational content, depending on the features that you're offering. If you need the admin to configure something before it functions, this is a really important, this is a really important time to be doing that. So here in the yellow, someone is saying, you need to do this step before this is fully functional, and your users can even do this, can even access it. Secondarily, we have the Get Started link in the navigation. This is just a way, if there's some complex steps, that your admin can go back over time and refer to it. Again, you control this. You have the ability to add these links in the UI. One of the biggest problems admins have is they can't find the feature in the UI. Even if we offer a confirmation modal to them, it's up to them to hunt around and figure out what this feature is. They may not have the context for it at all. They don't know if it's a reporting app and to look in reports. So it's really important to provide some guidance to your admins about where your feature is, where they can expect to find it. They're going to want that so that it can, one, confirm the installation, but also help guide end users. So in this screenshot, Analytics for Confluence by Good Software points out two locations to find, they're actually pointing out two locations here to find the feature in the product UI. This is a challenging one. This is a challenging one, but also something I urge you to consider. And what I'm proposing here is that you provide communication tools for the admin to then communicate out to end users. They control that communication flow. And if you make it easy for them, they're more inclined to do it. So in this top example here, someone has provided an email template to download. That means someone has crafted content. The admin doesn't have to make this up. And and can just distribute that message. The bottom one here is from a welcome email and is prompting the admin and telling them, hey, let your end users know that this new thing happened. And by the way, there's a get started guide. For really simple apps, you might want to skip this get started step and take your admin directly to the feature in the UI. That's instructional as well. It's showing them where to find the feature and guide the end user. Many of you have a configuration step. If you do, I think there's some key things here to get the admin through. There are a couple ways to guide the admin to a great first impression. This is what we call our spotlight pattern in our ADG system. This is available or most useful on cloud. Also, a caveat, I think what we call the blanket, which is the dark background, is difficult to do in an iframe, so you can just eliminate that. But the spotlight pattern is showing a first-time user how to step through a new feature or to even indicate that there's a new feature available to them. For our server products, this is the analogous pattern in AUI. And again, it's pointing out a new feature or something that has changed in the environment. You can also consider a wizard. The multi-step wizard is great for complicated configuration. This is a really great example that was recently launched by Yasun. They just added this to their configuration steps. And a note about these wizards and spotlights, they're great for that first-time use, so don't do it more than once. And secondly, if it's a really simple step, this can actually be kind of annoying to have to go through a wizard without being able to skip it. So just use your best judgment on that one. Empty states. So before, when your app is newly installed and it hasn't been fully built out yet, or maybe there's no data, this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to teach and instruct your admin, possibly guiding them to a first step, as you see in this example, with a clear CTA. This is K15T's scroll PDF exporter. And it's kind of inviting you to start your first template, also providing some context and information to the admin about capabilities. If you don't want to do that, another great way to handle an empty state is to use real examples. This is automation for Jira. They have a lot of complex rules. This is out of the box. They're giving you a set of rules that you can then tweak to your own environment or whatever you need to be doing. It's much easier for admins to do that than to start with a blank canvas. So giving users some real examples that they can learn from and tweak and reuse for themselves is a great way to go. Another really important area to consider here is the default values in any screen that requires input. This particular screen, this is how this looked out of the box. There are several things that are already ticked for me. Several settings were already made. How do you know what default to choose? Well, do this when you are absolutely sure that this is what a majority of your users want to be doing. I would even say 80% of your users. This is something you can determine through data if you've instrumented events. And sometimes there's just really, really obvious settings. So instead of making your user configure that, go ahead and configure that for them. If you don't have an obvious choice based on data, then don't provide a value. That can actually be something they have to clear out and can be annoying and frustrating as well. But what I recommend is that you provide tips instead. So for example, a closer look at this screen, there's definitely introductory text here. There are some labels above the fields, but within the field itself, it's giving you some examples of the kind of input that they're looking for. I actually don't know what a work attribute is, but I have a better chance of filling this out with the example information within that field. And sometimes a good example is all you need to help a user understand. When users do get stuck, it's a good idea to discreetly provide a way for them to get help of some kind. What I'm showing you here in the top example is a Learn More link that does take someone to some help information. Be careful with taking them out of the product, as I mentioned. If it's really complicated, again, it might be good to take them to a longer document. But in this bottom example, you may want to provide just tips and hints within the context of the UI itself. And it's enough information to keep them going without leaving the UI. And finally, the last step in our admin journey that we want to entice our admins to do is to really announce these features. This is directly connected to the communication tools that could be located on your Get Started page. So make it really, really easy for them to communicate out with their audience. Let's talk about our end users now and what we can do to help them. We want to notify the end user that a new app has been installed and educate them on how to get up and running. Our end user is very similar to that admin user in that they're focused on their own goal. They have their own work tasks to achieve, and they're not poking around Jira to see what has changed from yesterday. The end user may have requested the app, but it's more likely they did not, especially in large organizations. So they'll have no idea to expect this. And we know we can't entirely rely on admins to communicate new features within the product UI. So let's start with first awareness and how we can get users to even know something is going on. At this stage, the admin has installed the app and the end user has no idea anything has changed, but first awareness is about notifying them and get them excited about using your new feature. A welcome email, similar to the admin email that I mentioned, would be that email template that you're trying to get your admins to distribute. But the target is a bit different here. The admin email is focused on confirmation and installation, but for the end user, it's more like, this is that notification, something has changed in the environment. And the content should be about the value proposition that you're offering them and how you'll help make their work easier. It's always great to include a call to action, by the way. Again, that same principle of giving them that next step that they need to go do. The other way to help the end user understand a difference in their environment is looking at the spotlight pattern again. This eases users into using the app from within the Atlassian product, and it improves engagement by introducing users to new features and functionality at relative moments. So you may just want to highlight one new thing that you're offering or one new element in your navigation. Again, this one is tricky to implement on the entire page because of iframe limitations. But we do have this panel as well within our Jira instance that you can use for onboarding. So you could control that entire panel. Okay, so moving on to first use. Users are aware that the app has been installed. They know the basic value proposition at this point, and they have some expectations for what it does. First use is about educating the users how to use the app, having them complete their first tasks. And if you do too little at this phase, the user won't understand how to use the app. If you do too much, you'll overwhelm them. The goal is to get them into a state of productivity as quickly as possible. You don't have to show them every single feature in order to get them there. You just want them to be successful. The Get Started page, again, similar to the admin Get Started page that I mentioned, this is a second one in the product UI and targeted towards your end users. It should provide educational content and show them how to use the feature, maybe a good opportunity for tutorials or videos. Sometimes apps require configuration by the end user. This is also a great opportunity to talk about that. But generally, this page should contain content that the user has to refer to only once or twice to get going. And continuing on with a user's first engagement with your app, we have wizards, again, that you could use to walk your end user through a complicated setup process. Completing a big task for the first time will help educate them, excuse me. And so this is an example of an app getting an end user started with a pretty complex task. Just remember that wizards can be very helpful in some situations, but a turnoff in other situations. So use this carefully. Continuous use, so getting our end users to regularly engage with your app. The user has completed their first tasks. They're getting a feel for how it works in the product. They've been successful with that first task. So let's continue to support our users. Remember when I said during the first use, you don't have to show them every feature at once. Be opportunistic with educating your users. Show them new things on a need-to-know basis. This also gives you an opportunity to enhance their perspective of the app. Our empty states again. Empty states appear when there are no items to be shown, but rather than showing a blank screen, which could come across as something is broken, use illustrations and text to communicate with users about why they're not seeing something. Empty states should educate, prompt, and be considerate. Here is an example of what not to do. Consider the user's emotional state and the magnitude of the task at hand. It's not an opportunity to celebrate dumping all of their data. This is an example of how content is not aligned with the user's emotional state when their data is missing. Examples, defaults, tooltips, UI copy. These are just generally best practices. In this screen, we have labels above input fields. An important tool, on this screen we have labels above input fields, an important tool to indicate the type of input you want. But there are more tools that we can use here. Note the format tip inside of the due date field. Dates are different, as we know, especially cross-culturally. Americans have a very different way of writing their dates than Europeans, so these kinds of things are really helpful. The time is already filled in here. Perhaps that's the current time, and this particular app is making a guess at that. But we also have tip text underneath the description field that can help prompt or give the user an idea of what you want. Description is very vague in general. Remember, your users might not live and breathe your app as you do. They might use it a couple of times a week, maybe less. Give them ways to recall what is expected. Help and support. Give your users somewhere to go if they run into more complicated problems. For example, provide links to documentation or a ticketing system from within the product. In this case, our on-call app has explicitly provided this in the product navigation. Another option is to provide help directly in the UI, shown here as a sample icon with a hover state for Good Software's analytics product. So we've talked about onboarding users when the app is installed. However, if you introduce a new feature to your app that users might not be aware of, you need to introduce them to that feature so they know it exists and continue to use it. First awareness of the feature, first use, and ongoing use. Onboarding steps are the same whether the app is newly installed or new features are added. Keep in mind, user education is ongoing. And to wrap up, I'm going to quickly recap 3 things you can use as a starting point to improve your experience right away. Review the principles. In relation to your current onboarding experience, take a look at these principles. Are you violating any of them? Could you provide a screenshot instead of describing a step? Do you link out of the product when you could provide information inside of it? Second, use this flow as a template to evaluate your own app. Map your current experience to it and identify any gaps that you think you should fill in or what you might want to change. You don't have to do every single thing, but understand what your current state is so that you can focus on some improvement areas. And finally, user testing. You don't need someone who's overly familiar. You don't need an agency. You can simply go find someone in your work environment. You can actually take this to your mom. Can your mom set up and configure your app? It's a very simple metric, and you're going to learn a lot from watching it. So with that, I will say that all of this information I talked about today is in a blog post. The URL is go.atlassian.com/devonboard, and you're welcome to pick through this information more closely. And that's it.
Thank you very much for that mom metric. I'm definitely going to use that one. So we still have time for questions, and I know for a fact that at least Tobias has one.
You already know what's coming, right?
I think so.
GDPR and sending out emails.
Yeah. So the billing contact and the technical contact are GDPR. This is GDPR compliant because the email I'm suggesting that gets triggered is going to those two contacts. It's not going to end users, and they're already on record as purchasing the product and the app. Yeah.
Hi, you talk about Jira admins and users, but I was guessing what do you recommend in terms of partners, because most of the enterprise customers rely on partners to suggest them add-ons. So can you give us a tip about that?
Are you looking to influence partners for your add-on?
No,
Or
I'm a solution partner, so
Okay.
I'm hoping that the app vendors get aware that we are really their best friend.
Yeah, actually, so you bring a great point. I mean, I think we should be providing best practices to solution partners about guiding if you are setting up and getting someone within that organization that you're working with to announce these features. That's what my recommendation would be.
Hi, I don't know if I misunderstood, but you're suggesting that we have like two getting started pages, like one for your administrators that you give tips about, I don't know, limits or security options, and another one for users, that is?
I would take this on a case-by-case basis. Again, if it's necessary and relevant. But remember that end users don't have access to the admin UI, and they may need, if you have a complicated app, they may need a reference. And so yes, I am suggesting that. Same with the admin UI. If they need a reference and some guidance into setup because it's not really obvious, then I would recommend the Get Started page. Yeah.
Just a quick follow-up to Tobias's question. So obviously there's some existing context. Are you saying that on the GDPR side, if the Atlassian system were to send an email out to users from the billing or technical contact to the users, that's kosher? Because going through your process, there was the recommendation that you send updates to your end users, right? And one of those had an example of an email.
Yeah, let me clarify that, and I'm sorry if that's not clear. The email recommendation that I have here is that you need to get the system admin, the product admin, to trigger those emails. So you can't control, you don't have the end user email addresses or accounts.
Right, so if it's triggered, the argument would be if they're hitting the button and the Atlassian tool sends it out, it's either from the Atlassian tool or from that specific individual who happened to buy the app, the technical contact?
The only access you have as a vendor is the billing and technical admins.
So assuming that the technical admin is, the technical representative is an admin of that account, which is a first assumption, likely assumption, but a first assumption, that we'd have to really make a strong play to advocate for that one human being of all the potential administrators in a large, enterprise deployment, that one person would have to hit a button to announce to all their end users if something is newer.
Yes, and these are tips that I can only give you what you can do, as opposed to the ideal state where you are targeting the admin that installed it.
Is there an Atlassian blessed sort of side page that could articulate some of these, end arounds through that labyrinth? Because that's a really great example of obviously some hard work you've done to try and find some way for us to do something. Because if for the people in the room who haven't been living in the waters of GDPR for the last year, it seems, we didn't even know that we may have done it anyways, but we didn't even know that was going to be a blessed technique from Atlassian that would back us up.
So let me answer this way. I've given this talk at the prior 2 app weeks with a number of vendors, and this is the exact conversation we have, and so it's a good one and it's an important one. We don't have a great solution to it. However, several vendors got together and are thinking about it from that point of view. And one solution here is to actually have your admins mention people in the system. Again, this is creating a
It's another potential workaround. Yeah.
It's a workaround. It's not
for a
direct.
small team. Yeah. Maybe you could enable a way to mention at bulk.
What I would recommend at this point in terms of
At all.
coming up with good solutions right now is to go to the developer community or the vendor community and use each other as and your knowledge on how to work around this problem. And I don't see this problem getting easier with GDPR right now. Yeah.
Thank you, Tobias, for continuing to be a champion on that.
So we're out of time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kelly.